I want to take a look at computer networking and using the Kali Linux distro on various different networks. The first thing I will say is my base operating system is Windows, and I've got a Kali VM installed in VirtualBox, which has some limitations. So if you are going to do network stuff that's low level, like VLANing and things like that, you're probably going to have to do pass through rather than NATing or bridging. And we'll talk about NATing and bridging in just a second. But pass through means if you buy one of these network adapters, USB or something like that, where you can connect it directly to your Kali Linux, that means that the Windows operating system isn't being used at all, so the Windows TCP stack isn't being used at all. And for things like VLANing and low-level TCP, things like that, you're probably going to need to cut out the Windows networking piece and go direct to Linux. Okay, so if we look in the virtual machine at the moment, if I go into devices and network and look at the network settings, at the moment my network, there's only one network adapter set. You can have up to 4. So just one's enabled. At the moment it's set to NAT or network address translation. This means that the network card in my laptop controlled by Windows is being used, but a virtual network's being set up. So the IP address that I get is an artificial one. It's not really one that's on the network. And for most things, like browsing the internet and using the virtual machine as a workstation, that would work fine. But what we need to do is things like compromising machines, routing through networks. So we're going to need a bridged adapter. Okay, so let's have a look at the prospect of using my Wi-Fi adapter built into the laptop and the Ethernet port, so the physical network also on the laptop. So it'll be going through Windows. I'm not using pass-through at the moment. If I go into my virtual machine settings, so devices, now I will say at the moment the menu's here. Sometimes the menu's hidden in VirtualBox, in which case you will have a host key, which on my machine is the right hand side control key, and normally the home key, and that will fire up the menu if the menu's been hidden. On mine I've got mine set to so I can view the menu. So if I go into devices and network settings, at the moment I've only got the single adapter enabled, and we'll look at the prospect of enabling both adapters at the same time, but we'll come back to that. Let's start off with the easy option for an easy life, and that's where adapter 1, you can either set it to be set to your Ethernet or you can set it to your Wi-Fi, and at any point you can come in here, go to devices, go to network, go to your network settings and flip between whether I want to be on Wi-Fi or whether I want to be on the physical adapter. Now, life is easier if when you're on Wi-Fi, if you unplug the physical network, and when you're on the physical network, if you go into Windows and turn the Wi-Fi off. It just makes life so much easier so that you know where you're at. Let's start with Wi-Fi. So we're on Wi-Fi. I'm going to say OK, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bounce the network. So I click on this icon here. That's the Ethernet port symbol. So I'm going to do a normal click, and I'm going to do a wired one. And what that does is it disconnects, reconnects the network, and gets me set up. So let's have a look at what Kali did. So in here, the network manager should have used DHCP to get me an IP address. So if I do an IP address, so it's given me an IP address which looks like one that's connectable to the Wi-Fi. To test I'm actually able to get out to the world, I'm going to ping 8.8.8.8. That's fine. I'm on the Wi-Fi, my Kali box is connected, and I've got a route through to the internet. Let's try and get on to our physical Ethernet adapter. So first thing I need to do is go into the virtual machine itself and change the adapter from the Wi-Fi adapter to the physical Ethernet adapter. And then the same idea again, you'll need to bounce the network. So I'm just going to give it a second. It's just sorting itself out, getting a connection. So when I go this time, it's now highlighted. I can click. It does that DHCP piece, gets an IP address. So now when I do an IPA, I've now got an address which is on our internal network. And now what I can do is I can ping something that's on the internal network, and I've got a connection to the internal network. Now, because I've change the virtual machine to only use the physical network, the Ethernet, if I now ping 8.8.8.8, I shouldn't get a reply because there shouldn't be a route out to the internet. So it's one or the other. And at any time I can go in here, I can go into network settings, I can decide whether I want to be on the Wi-Fi or on the physical network. Say OK. Then I can bounce the network, click on the icon for the network, click on wired one. That then disconnects, reconnects, gets me an IP address. I can always do an IPA or an IP address and have a look to see what address I got given. And I can always do my pings to see whether or not I'm on the Wi-Fi or if I'm on the physical network. So I shouldn't be on the physical network at the moment, which is correct. So that's working. Just because it's not easy to see, whenever I'm doing these pings, remember, in order to stop, you can just do a Control and C with your keyboard. That'll stop the pings from happening. Okay, let's look at a manual IP address. So at the moment, we've been setting the IP address dynamically using DHCP. But what we can do is, I'm going to set my network to be on bridged and on my actual network, so it's on the physical Ethernet like that. And rather than just bouncing the network, I'm going to do a right click, edit connections. It's the wired connection that I'm setting. I'm going to slide along the menus to IPv4. Now where it says automatic DHCP, that's not what we want. We want to change to a manual address. And then down here you can actually set the addresses. So I'm going to say add to add a line to the table. I'm going to add in my fixed IP, which you'll get from your administrator. The size of the network, mine's a /24. The default gateway to get off the network. So my default gateway, again, being given by the network administrators there, wherever your DNS server is, and whatever your search domain is. So for me, it's that those settings you're not expected to know those. They'll be given to you by your network administrator. And then I say save and I close. Again, I need to bounce the network. If I just do an IPA, I've still got my old address. It's actually a Wi-Fi address. Until you click on the icon for the network, click on wired one, it won't disconnect, reconnect, and take up that fixed IP that we set. Let's check it with an IPA. So it has set to 10.0.0.45. Let's do an IP route and see if our default gateway has been set. That's fine as well. Let's make sure the DNS has been set. So I'm going to cat my etc resolve.conf. That'll tell me if the DNS has been set. So we've got a search domain set up and a name server set up. And let's do a ping of that name server and make sure we've got an actual connection out. So that's fine. So we've got a fixed IP using the graphical user interface built into Kali. Now, a bit more advanced, but what you can do is you can power off your virtual machine. Let's do that. So the machine's powered off. Now what I can do is I can go into the settings, right click, settings. I can go to the network settings and I can actually enable another adapter. So I could have the Wi-Fi adapter and the Ethernet, physical Ethernet network at the same time pretty much. So on adapter 1 I've got it set to the physical Ethernet. Adapter 2 is now enabled and it's set to the Wi-Fi. So I'll click OK. I'm going to fire up my machine. Okay, so the machine's now booted and I should now have 2 network adapters, but let's have a look at it from the menu here. So when I go into network and network settings, there's now 2 adapters. Adapter 1 is set to the physical Ethernet and 2 is set to the Wi-Fi, so that's all good. Now in Kali, when you go into the network, when I go to bounce my network, when I click, there's only one connection. So what we'll need to do is just go into here, edit connections. Where there's a wide connection one, we'll need to look at the settings for that, and we'll need to add a second wide connection. So if I go into the settings, So it says what device. At the moment it's not set to one, so I'm going to tell it that I want wired connection 1 to be the first Ethernet port, which will be the physical wired connection, and it's still set to our manual 45. That's fine, that's okay, we'll leave that as it is. But what we'll also do is we'll add another, so I'll click on plus, so another Ethernet. Yeah, create Ethernet connection 1. I might call this Wi-Fi to remind me that this is the Wi-Fi. And under device, I'm going to set ETH1. And under IPv4, I'm going to leave that on DHCP, so leave that alone as it is. So now I've got the option, without going into my virtual machine, of just using Kali to switch between the different networks. So I've got a wired connection 1 and a Wi-Fi, and I can just switch between the two. What you could do is you could rename your wired connection 1 and call that Ethernet, or physical Ethernet, or something that makes life easy for you to remember which one's which. So now I've got Ethernet or Wi-Fi. So when I click on my icon, I can either switch between Wi-Fi or Ethernet. So Ethernet, let's try that first. We'll open a terminal. We'll do an IPA. And yeah, we've got this 45 address. We should be able to get to our server like that. It's fine. And if we want to switch to Wi-Fi, we go in here, we can connect to Wi-Fi, and we can even make sure we disconnect the Ethernet. So now when I do an IPA, it's now got a Wi-Fi address, and when we ping 8.8.8.8, we can now connect. So now we've got a more advanced setup where the virtual machine itself has got two network cards, one for Wi-Fi, one for Ethernet, and we're actually just using Kali to switch between the two. So whichever technique works better for you, go right ahead and select the best one for yourself. When you get a minute, pop on over to the Cyberscheme website. That's the cyberscheme.org. Have a look at all of our training options, the classes that we do. Have a look at the assessments that we do and all the good stuff that's going on at the Cyberscheme.